It started with a message that felt harmless.
No flirting.
No pressure. Just a sentence that sounded human. I think I recognize you. She didn't know that this moment wasn't random, that her voice would soon become data, and that the person she fell in love with was never real. This is not a story about stupidity. It's a story about how perfectly a voice can be engineered to sound like love. It didn't feel like the beginning of anything important. That's the part that still unsettles me the most when I try to remember how it started. There was no sense of crossing a line, no warning in my body, no moment where instinct screamed. Just a quiet evening dissolving into another quiet night, the kind where time loses its shape and you scroll because stopping would mean sitting alone with your thoughts. The message appeared while I was half watching a show I didn't care about, my attention drifting in and out. My phone buzzed softly, not urgent, not demanding. I almost ignored it. Almost. This might sound strange, but I think I recognize you. I reread it once, then again. Not because it was clever, but because it wasn't. There was no emoji, no exaggerated friendliness, no immediate attempt to charm. The tone felt hesitant, human. The kind of message someone writes and then rewrites before finally sending, hoping not to sound foolish. I tapped on the profile.
A man.
Mid-30s, maybe early 40s. His face didn't trigger anything specific, and that, I realize now, was intentional. No perfect jawline, no overly expressive smile. Just someone you might pass on the street and never remember. His photos were sparse. A few outdoor shots, neutral lighting, nothing that screamed curated fantasy. I put the phone down. 5 minutes passed. Then another vibration. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. You just look like someone I once knew very well. That line slipped past my defenses before I had time to build them. Not desire. Not flattery.
Memory.
The implication that I existed in someone else's emotional past, even if only as a resemblance. I typed slowly. I don't think we've met. I expected the conversation to end there. Most do. Instead, the reply came almost immediately. Then maybe I'm confusing you with someone I lost. Or maybe my mind is playing tricks on me. Either way, sorry for disturbing you. That should have been the end.
Clean.
Polite. No pressure. But I found myself staring at the screen, unsettled by a faint sense of unfinishedness. The message didn't ask anything. It didn't push. It retreated. I replied again. It's okay. I get confused like that sometimes too. That was the moment the system adjusted. From then on, the conversation unfolded slowly, deliberately. There was no rush toward intimacy, no overt curiosity about my life. He talked about ordinary things, work frustrations, the strange loneliness of modern routines, how days could feel full and empty at the same time. He didn't complain dramatically. He didn't overshare. He listened more than he spoke. When I didn't answer for hours, he didn't question it. He didn't send follow-ups. When I did answer, he responded with warmth, but never relief, as if my presence was appreciated, not required. That balance is important. Too much interest triggers suspicion. Too little kills connection. He learned me through absence as much as presence. By the 4th day, he knew the cadence of my replies. By the end of the first week, he knew which topics made me respond faster, which ones made my answers shorter, more guarded. He didn't ask about my past relationships. He let me mention them first. He didn't ask why I lived alone. He simply acknowledged it when I did. One evening, after a long exchange that felt unexpectedly grounding, he sent a message that lingered longer than the others. I feel like text hides parts of people.
Tone.
Pauses. The things we don't write. Then after a moment, but only if you're comfortable. No pressure. I stared at my phone for a long time before recording my first voice message. I hadn't realized how intimate it felt until my finger hovered over the button. A voice carries more than words. It carries hesitation, insecurity, rhythm. It carries identity. I kept it short. My name, a greeting, an apology for sounding tired. I sent it and immediately regretted it. The reply arrived in less than a minute. I pressed play. His voice was normal, and that's what made it dangerous. Not polished, not theatrical. There was warmth, yes, but also restraint, a softness that suggested attentiveness rather than performance. "I'm really glad you trusted me with that," he said quietly. "Your voice fits you. I don't know how else to explain it." I listened again, then again. My chest tightened in a way I didn't fully understand. It wasn't attraction exactly. It was recognition, the feeling of being received without being examined. What I didn't know was that this exchange had already shifted the nature of the interaction entirely. The moment voices entered the conversation, it stopped being casual communication and became data acquisition. Every pause, every breath, every slight crack when I laughed, all of it was material. Modern voice cloning systems don't need hours of recording. They thrive on variety, not duration. Emotional speech accelerates learning. And I was emotional without realizing it. We started sending voice messages regularly after that. Short ones, casual ones, sometimes just a few seconds long. He never sent too many in a row, never overwhelmed me. He mirrored my pace, my length, my energy. Mirroring builds trust faster than disclosure. Weeks passed. The conversations deepened without becoming heavy. He talked about feeling disconnected from people despite being surrounded by them. I talked about the exhaustion of explaining myself. He validated without probing. I relaxed without noticing. The first video call didn't happen until the dynamic felt stable, almost routine. By then, hearing his voice was part of my day. Silence from him felt like something missing rather than something gained. When he suggested a video call, he did it carefully. "We don't have to. I just thought it might be nice to see each other properly. But I don't want to rush anything." I agreed before I could analyze why. The call connected slowly. He apologized for the connection, blaming the place he was staying. When his face appeared on the screen, it aligned almost perfectly with the image I had constructed in my mind. Almost. There was a slight delay between sound and movement, a barely perceptible softness to the image. Nothing that couldn't be explained by bad signal. "I hope it's okay," he said, smiling. "If it looks weird, tell me." I didn't tell him, because my brain compensated. Because emotion fills in gaps more efficiently than logic ever could. We didn't talk long. He didn't keep me there. He ended the call first, citing a drop in connection. "I'm glad we did this," he said before disappearing. "You're exactly how you sound." After that, the rhythm changed subtly. He became a little more present, a little more personal. Not possessive, careful never to cross that line, but intimate in ways that felt earned. He noticed small things, patterns in my speech, the way I apologized when I didn't need to, the way my tone shifted when I talked about certain memories. "You don't realize how hard you are on yourself," he said once, casually, as if stating an observation rather than an accusation. I laughed it off, but the word stayed. Love didn't arrive suddenly. It accumulated, like sediment, layer by layer, invisible until it was heavy enough to shape the landscape. He never said it first. I did. The moment felt natural, almost inevitable. When he said it back, there was no dramatic declaration, no promise of forever, just quiet acceptance. "I feel the same," he said. "I didn't want to rush you." That sentence sealed something inside me. The first problem appeared months later, after the bond had settled into something I no longer questioned.
His voice sounded different that night.
Tired, tense, not performative, restrained. "There's something I should tell you," he said, "and I'm afraid it might make you think less of me." Fear invites closeness. Vulnerability, when controlled, is the most effective tool of trust. He talked slowly, carefully, about a financial complication, temporary, framed as inconvenience rather than crisis. He didn't ask for help. He emphasized how much he hated even talking about it. I offered before he could. He resisted, briefly, convincingly. "I don't want you to feel responsible for me," he said. That hesitation mattered more than the request ever could. When I sent the money, I told myself it was my choice, that I was acting from agency, not pressure. That belief was necessary, because what came next depended on it. After the money left my account, nothing dramatic happened. That was the strangest part. There was no immediate relief, No sudden intimacy spike. No emotional reward that would have made the transaction feel transactional. He didn't become euphoric or overly grateful. He simply sounded quieter.
"Thank you," he said.
Not breathless. Not theatrical. Just low and steady. "I won't forget this." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. It didn't promise repayment. It didn't promise permanence. It implied memory.
Continuity.
A future in which this moment would still matter. For a while after that, things returned to normal, or what I thought of as normal. The conversations resumed their familiar rhythm. Voice messages in the morning, texts during the day, occasional video calls with the same excuses about connection, the same slight delay that I had stopped noticing altogether. I told myself that the financial situation was temporary, that this was just something couples helped each other through. I didn't call it a sacrifice. I didn't call it a risk. I framed it as alignment. The second request didn't come as a request. It came as silence. His messages slowed again, this time more noticeably. When he replied, his words were shorter, his voice flatter. Not cold, restrained, as if he were holding something back. "What's wrong?" I asked one night. He didn't answer immediately. When his voice message arrived, it was longer than usual. "I don't want to keep putting this on you," he said. "You've already done more than I ever expected. I'm just trying to figure things out on my end. I don't want you to feel like I'm only here when I need something." The carefulness of that sentence dismantled my remaining resistance. It positioned him as ethical, self-aware, concerned about my well-being. It reframed the imbalance as something he was actively trying to avoid. I reassured him, too quickly, too earnestly. "I don't feel used," I said. "I just want you to be okay." He exhaled audibly, a small sound, almost imperceptible. "I don't deserve you," he said. That phrase is dangerous. Not because it's dramatic, but because it lowers your standards without you noticing. When someone positions themselves as unworthy, you instinctively compensate by offering more. I sent more money. This time, I hesitated for only a moment. After that, the pattern established itself fully. A complication, a pause, a careful disclosure, a refusal that wasn't quite a refusal, my offer, his reluctant acceptance. Each cycle deepened the bond while eroding my sense of choice. I told myself I was deciding freely, but the decisions were being shaped long before I made them. My emotional environment had been curated. Between these moments, he was attentive in ways that felt uncannily precise. He remembered details I didn't recall telling him. The phrasing of old sentences. The way my mood shifted when I spoke about certain topics. "You go quiet when you're overwhelmed," he said once. Not distant, just quieter. I hadn't noticed that myself. There were moments when his voice felt almost too attuned. When he mirrored my tone so exactly that it felt like speaking into an echo rather than a conversation. But those moments passed quickly, smoothed over by affection and familiarity. One night, I sent him a voice message while lying in bed, lights off, speaking softly so as not to disturb the silence of the apartment. I talked about a memory I hadn't revisited in years, something small and sad and unresolved. My voice wavered. I paused in the middle of a sentence, unsure how to continue. When he replied, his voice followed the same rhythm, the same pause, the same hesitation before the word I had struggled to say.
I noticed it then.
A flicker of unease crossed my mind. Not a full thought, just a sensation, like realizing you've been hearing your own footsteps echo behind you for longer than makes sense. "You sound tired," he said gently. "You don't have to explain everything to me." I let the moment go. I didn't want to interrogate comfort. The video calls became more frequent after that, though still short. Always initiated by him. Always ended by him. The image quality never improved. The excuses stayed plausible. Hotels. Temporary housing. Travel. Sometimes the delay between his lip movements and the sound seemed more pronounced. Other times it disappeared entirely. Once, during a call, his face froze for a fraction of a second while his voice continued. "Sorry," he said immediately. "Bad connection." I nodded. I didn't realize then how carefully those imperfections were calibrated. A flawless deepfake invites scrutiny. A flawed one invites empathy. It gives the viewer something to forgive. The first time I heard my own voice coming from him, I thought I was imagining it. It happened during a casual exchange, nothing emotionally charged. I had sent him a voice message earlier that day, joking about something trivial. When he replied later, he repeated a phrase I had used, not the words, but the intonation, the exact rise and fall of my voice at the end of the sentence. I frowned at the screen. "That's funny," I typed. "You sound like me there." He laughed it off. "Maybe I've been talking to you too much," he said. "You're rubbing off on me." The explanation was reasonable. Intimacy does lead to vocal convergence. People subconsciously mirror each other all the time. But this wasn't subconscious. It was precise. The more emotionally open I became, the more his voice began to reflect mine.
Not constantly.
Not obviously, just enough to blur the boundary between us. When I was calm, he was calm. When I was anxious, his voice carried a corresponding tension. He never contradicted me, not directly. When I expressed doubt, he reframed it as self-protection. When I expressed fear, he validated it without amplifying it. "You're not wrong to be cautious," he said once. "The world teaches people to protect themselves. I just wish you didn't have to protect yourself from me." That sentence did something irreversible. It repositioned my skepticism as a threat to intimacy, not as a rational response, but as a barrier to closeness. From then on, questioning him felt like withdrawing affection. The requests escalated gradually, not in amount, but in frequency, each one framed as the last. Each one accompanied by a slight change in his demeanor, a subtle withdrawal when I hesitated, a warmth when I complied. I told myself I was noticing patterns because I was anxious, not because something was wrong. Then came the message that didn't sound like him. It arrived late at night, a voice message unannounced. I pressed play. The voice was familiar, intimate, too familiar. It was my voice. Not an exact replica, not yet, but close enough that my stomach dropped. The cadence, the way certain words softened, the slight breath before sentences. The message was short. "Hey, I was just thinking about you. I hope you're okay." I stared at the screen, frozen. Then another message arrived.
His voice this time. "I'm sorry."
"That wasn't meant for you. Wrong file." My heart pounded. "What do you mean?" I typed. A pause. Then, "I've been recording reminders for myself. Voice memos. I must have sent the wrong one." The explanation didn't make sense. Why would his reminder sound like me? Why would he be recording reminders in my voice? I should have stopped then. Instead, I let myself be reassured. "I must be tired," I said to myself.
"I'm projecting."
He apologized profusely. His voice carried genuine-sounding embarrassment. "I can't believe that happened," he said. "I'd understand if that freaked you out." I told him it was fine. That was the night something fundamental shifted. After that, his messages became more inconsistent. Sometimes he replied instantly. Other times hours passed. When I asked what was happening, he explained vaguely. Stress. Complications. He emphasized how much he hated dragging me into it. The money requests returned. Larger now. More urgent. Framed as final obstacles. "I just need to get past this," he said. "Then everything stabilizes." I sent what I could, then what I shouldn't have. When I told him I couldn't send more, he didn't get angry. He didn't accuse me. He sounded disappointed in himself. "I never wanted this," he said quietly. "I hate that I've put you in this position." That guilt sat heavier than any demand ever could. The silence that followed lasted longer than before. Days passed, then a week. I checked my messages compulsively, oscillating between dread and hope. When a notification finally appeared, my hands shook. It wasn't from him. It was from an unknown number, a voice message. I pressed play. It was me. Not a greeting this time, not casual. It was my voice, saying his name the way I did when I was vulnerable, saying it softly, intimately. Then, I trust you. I felt cold. I never recorded that message. I was certain of it. I searched through my phone, my archives, my deleted files. Nothing. Another message arrived.
My voice again.
I know you're trying your best. I'll wait. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in my hands, unable to breathe properly. Then his message came. I didn't want you to find out like this, he said.
His voice sounded different now.
Stripped of warmth. Controlled. But I need you to understand something. The message cut off before he finished. I never heard from him again after that. The accounts went dark. The profile disappeared. The number stopped responding. What remained were the recordings.
Dozens of them.
My voice, stitched together from fragments I didn't remember giving. Saying things I never said in that order. Expressing loyalty, patience, devotion. I reported it. To the platform. To my bank. To the authorities. They were polite. Efficient. Helpless. This type of case is becoming more common, one officer said gently. AI-generated impersonation is difficult to trace. Difficult. As if difficulty softened the loss. I stopped listening to the recordings eventually, but sometimes late at night, I swear I can still hear the echo of my voice speaking words I didn't choose. And that's when I understand what the real theft was. Not the money, but the part of me that learned to recognize love by its sound and can no longer trust silence. The first thing I learned after everything ended was how quiet the world becomes when the constant presence disappears. Not dramatic silence, not cinematic emptiness, just a dull absence where something used to be. A missing rhythm, a gap you keep expecting to fill itself. I kept checking my phone long after I knew there would be nothing there. It wasn't hope anymore. It was habit. My body still anticipated the sound of his voice messages, the subtle relief they used to bring. Even knowing what I knew, some part of me waited. I reported the fraud the next morning. The process was procedural, almost gentle in its impersonality. Forms, dates, amounts, screenshots, audio files. The bank representative listened carefully, asked me to forward the recordings, nodded sympathetically in a way that suggested experience rather than surprise. This kind of scam has increased significantly, she said, especially involving emotional manipulation through AI-generated media. She used those words as if they were neutral, as if emotional manipulation were a technical term rather than a description of something that had crawled inside my life and rearranged it. They froze the remaining funds as a precaution, opened an investigation, gave me a reference number. There was no mention of recovery. The police interview came later. Another quiet room, another polite face, another request to explain everything from the beginning. I told the story carefully, choosing my words with an awareness that I was already being evaluated. Not officially, but internally. I could feel the invisible scale measuring credibility, intelligence, responsibility. Did you ever meet him in person?
No.
Did you verify his identity independently?
No.
Were you aware of AI voice cloning technologies?
Yes.
In theory. The officer nodded slowly. These cases are difficult, he said. The technology is evolving faster than regulation. Often, the individuals behind it operate across multiple jurisdictions. Across multiple lives, I thought. Across countless conversations that probably sounded just as real as mine had. When I left the station, the city looked unchanged. People moved with purpose. Conversations happened everywhere around me. Voices layered over each other in a way that suddenly felt overwhelming. I realized then how much of my recent emotional life had been contained in one channel, one voice, one carefully curated presence. Without it, everything else sounded too loud, too unpredictable. Friends reacted the way people usually do when they encounter a threat they don't want to imagine happening to them. Some were supportive, but distant. Some were curious in a way that bordered on interrogation. Some tried to reassure themselves by emphasizing what they would have done differently. I would never send money like that. I would have noticed the signs. I don't trust people online. I let them talk. Explaining felt pointless. The truth was too nuanced for comfort, too unsettling to absorb easily. Because the reality wasn't that I trusted blindly. It was that I trusted gradually, incrementally, under conditions engineered to make skepticism feel unnecessary. I started therapy a few weeks later, not because anyone told me to, but because my internal world felt unreliable. I couldn't tell anymore which emotional responses were mine and which had been shaped. The therapist didn't rush to label what had happened. She asked about the voice. "How did it make you feel when you heard it?" she asked. "Safe," I said, without hesitation, then paused. Scene.
We talked about attachment.
About how humans calibrate trust through consistency and responsiveness. About how AI systems can replicate those cues with unnerving precision. This wasn't about deception in the traditional sense, she said. It was about simulation. That distinction mattered. A lie collapses when exposed. A simulation lingers. It continues to feel real even after you know it wasn't. For a long time, I couldn't listen to voice messages from anyone without feeling a subtle tension in my body. I replayed sentences in my head, analyzing intonation, timing, emotion. Was this spontaneous? Was this mirrored? Was this real? The question exhausted me. I deleted most of the recordings eventually. Not all at once. One by one. Each deletion felt heavier than it should have, as if I were erasing evidence of something that had mattered deeply, even if it hadn't been real. I kept one file. Just one. Not because it comforted me, but because it reminded me how convincing a voice can be. How easily trust can be constructed when it's fed back to you in a familiar tone. I began reading about AI voice synthesis in detail. Not obsessively, deliberately. I needed to understand the mechanics so they would stop feeling mystical. 30 seconds of audio. Emotional variability. Prosodic patterns. It wasn't magic. It was math trained on vulnerability. That knowledge didn't undo the damage, but it gave it edges. Boundaries. A shape I could examine instead of something amorphous that haunted me. Months passed. The investigation went nowhere. The funds were gone. The platform sent a generic update about ongoing efforts to combat impersonation. The language was polished, distant. It acknowledged the problem without touching its weight. Life resumed, in the way life always does, unevenly, imperfectly, without asking if you're ready. There were moments when I caught myself wanting to hear that voice again. Not because I missed him, but because my nervous system associated it with relief, with being understood without effort. That realization scared me more than the scam itself, because it meant the most dangerous part hadn't been the money or the lies. It had been how easily my sense of connection had been reprogrammed. Gradually, the fear dulled. Not disappeared, dulled. I learned to sit with uncertainty again, to let conversations unfold without dissecting them, to tolerate imperfection in people's responses. Real humans are inconsistent. They interrupt. They misunderstand. They forget details. They get tired. I learned to see those flaws as reassurance. The voice that loved me had never hesitated accidentally, never lost track of a detail, never spoke when it shouldn't have. That should have been the warning. One evening, months later, I received a voice message from friend. Casual, rambling, slightly awkward. She repeated herself and laughed at it. I felt something loosen in my chest. For the first time in a long while, the imperfection felt safe. I don't tell this story to warn people away from technology, or from love, or from trust. I tell it because we are entering a world where intimacy can be simulated with frightening accuracy, where voices can be manufactured to sound like care, and presence can be generated without accountability. And because knowing that doesn't make you immune, it just makes you human in a new context. The voice that loved me never existed, but the way it taught me to listen and to doubt does. And that stays. The most dangerous part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the lies. It was how real the voice felt, how safe it sounded, how easily it replaced silence. The voice that loved her never existed, but the damage did. And if this story made you uncomfortable, that's because it's already happening.